This place had many names throughout history. It is most famous for its idol temples, built to worship the Pan god, and hence the name of it, Banias, or in Hebrew, Banias. You've probably seen the drawing of this god before. It's that half-man, half-goat type of a god. So how did they worship him exactly? Human sacrifice. And the story goes like this. They would take the human sacrifice into this cave and throw the person into a natural abyss, reaching the underground waters at the back of the cave. If the victims disappeared in the water, this was a sign that the god had accepted the offering. If, however, signs of blood appeared in the nearby springs, the sacrifice had been rejected. If you consider the craziness of this pagan worship and say, I'd say we're living in a far worse time, these few sacrifices are nothing comparing to the 1.5 billion abortions in the last 35 years alone.
All right. My name is Ben Burgis, and this is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by our super producer, Jake Abbott, and our absurdly talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. In a few minutes, we are going to play my interview with probably the world's third most famous Slovenian person behind Melania Trump and Luka Doncic. Who would be Slavoj Žižek, philosopher, psychologist, writer, and commentator. We had a long conversation. We had to pre-record it because it is 2 a.m. right now in Ljubljana, which is where he lives. But honestly, it was great. For anyone who watched his movie from about 10 years ago, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology, you could say we did not, in fact, eat out of the trash can of ideology, but instead had a healthy and nutritious non-trash can meal, and we got into some of our disagreements just a little bit, but mostly when I talked to him, I just like to give him a chance to sound off about, well, everything, because that is what he does, and I always learn a lot. So I'm really excited to share that with you guys. But first, we got to talk about Pan. At the beginning of this month, I started a philosophy Substack, since I want to keep writing about politics for Jacobin and the Daily Beast and everywhere else the way I usually do. I also want to write more about philosophy than I've been doing, and this is a good way to do that. It's called Philosophy for the People, and new essays go up every Sunday, early morning or late morning, depending on which coast you live on. And I wrote one about Slavoj that went up the Sunday before last. That's it right there. Don't cancel Žižek. We're going to talk about that just a little bit in the conversation that I'm going to play for you guys soon. But the one that went up yesterday was all about Pan. There we go. Jordan Peterson thinks atheists unconsciously worship Pan. That's the one. So if you don't know your Greek mythology, that's the bearded guy who plays a flute, and he has the arms and horns of a goat. And conservatives seem to be obsessed with this guy for some reason. This god that nobody's actually worshipped for thousands of years. Andy, you found that cold open for us. Who the fuck is this guy who's in the cold open?
I have no clue. There's this channel that posted a bunch of stuff from InfoWars, and kind of like was just jumping from pan video to pan video after that. And it looks like it's somebody who's exploring Israel through videos. And there was that little gem in there. So
yeah, fair enough. Well, the reason that I was thinking about Pan, I'd actually had something else planned for the Philosophy Substack for yesterday. I was going to write about that other great friend of the show, Sam Harris, and his book about free will. I'm actually going to do that for next Sunday. But the reason I ended up writing about Dr. Peterson for this last Sunday is because in between on Monday, so we did the Give Them a Revolution live show on, so 8 days ago, I guess, in New York. You guys were there. It was a good time. Hope we're going to have a video to share with everybody who wasn't there very soon. But the next day, I was sitting on a plane with good friends Jason Miles from This Is Revolution and our live show producer Jordan. And I was, just kind of absentmindedly flipping through my Twitter timeline on my phone while I waited for the plane to take off, them to tell me to turn the phone to airplane mode and all that stuff. And I saw Jordan Peterson tweeting, well, here we go. Atheistic hedonists unconsciously worship Pan. And I thought, what an odd thing to say. I would think if you're an atheist, you don't believe in any gods, you don't worship anybody. But if you are, why Pan, right? Like, it's so confusing in so many ways. And then it really started to hit me that the more you look at Peterson's own religious beliefs, the more confusing it gets. So take, for example, this.
God is that which calls you to make the appropriate sacrifices and calls you on it when you don't. And try to escape that and see what happens. We know perfectly well, that that's a pathway to hell. And you might say, I don't believe in hell. And I would say, that means you don't know anything.
So that sounds to me like a guy who's pretty sure there's a God, right? I mean, I don't know. First blush.
Yeah, I would think so. It astounds me that the state of, the country of Turkey let him do that there. But
I don't know. I mean, here, let's think about it this way. Jake, if you had to guess, like, I think we could ease our way into this with a political example. So think about like Antifa. Jordan Peterson doesn't like Antifa one bit, right? He's very, very opposed to that. And he thinks they do a lot of bad things. So if you had to guess, what would be his explanation of why they do bad things?
If I had to guess based on no information at all, just based on why it would be reasonable to probably, that they're overly left wing, that they're maybe kind of destructive. They believe in breaking down the system instead of having a more conservative understanding of how family structure should work alongside, like, aligning with Peterson's vision of the world. I mean, that would be would that be reasonable?
Yeah, that is an extremely reasonable guess, but I believe we have some video evidence here. So let's see what he actually says.
Wanted to ask you about based on your knowledge, your background, your clinical experience, what is the psychology of this mob violence? When I see it, I don't even recognize some of these. They seem animalistic, is what I mean.
They're worse than animals. They're worse than animals because animals, they just kill to eat, Human beings, they have a twist in them that makes them far worse than animals when they really get going. Well, I think you really want to know what I think? I think it's revenge against God for the crime of being. That's really what I think. It's Cain and Abel. It's like, oh, Abel's your guy, eh, God? How about if I take him out in the field and beat him to death? How do you feel about that? All my sacrifices went unrewarded. Yeah, it's like, yeah, that's what it is at the bottom of the hell of things.
I can never watch that clip enough. That's his when he's his Oscar clip, when he's nominated and they show the clip. That's his Oscar-winning clip. He actually is a good actor. I mean, I think he really believes it, maybe, and that's what makes a good actor. But I love watching that clip.
Yeah, right. His method. Yeah, I mean, this is a man who is capable of moving himself to tears at a moment's notice, thinking about how his political enemies are angry at God for the crime of being. And if you've ever read 12 Rules for Life, you know that being has a capital B at the beginning of it, which is some weird tribute to Heidegger, Dasein, but forget that. Last two clips. If you don't believe in hell, you don't know anything. You know, the bad people who do bad things are, whatever their alleged political or cultural grievances, are really just angry at God. This sounds like some very intense, like this. You know, this sounds like the kind of thing that somebody would say in a sermon in the kind of church where somebody might start like speaking in tongues, and like that would be a totally normal and expected part of the service. So it sounds like the guy has some pretty intense religious beliefs. But then, and I know we've played this before, but it's okay. We're just going to do a shorter version of this one right now, and I don't think seeing it once is enough to get sort of soak up the full profundity of it. You'd start to look at his pronouncements over the years, and you see some odd things. Like here is Dr. Peterson with fellow friend of the show Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin's show. And Dave has asked him about a minute before. We're not going to play this part, but Dave has asked him about a minute before, essentially, like, give the man credit where credit's due. Dave Rubin is not, I think, very bright or very principled or very, I don't know, come up with some other adjectives. He's probably not very much of any of those things either. But in this case, he's trying to ask a good question. Essentially, what he's just asked is, hey, Ben and Jordan, you guys do a lot of God talk, but what do you actually mean? Keep it simple. And I swear to God, he did say keep it simple before this. There's about a minute of meandering up until this point. I'm going to spare you, but let's just watch the key part of it.
Well, let's say you decide to follow the best leader in a battle. Well, then you don't die. Like, he might get all the women, but you don't die. So at least you're still in the game. Yeah. And it might be the same if you're following the greatest hunter. And the greatest hunter wouldn't be the person who was best at bringing down the game. It would be the person who is best at bringing down the game and sharing it and organizing the next hunt and all of that, right? And so men will organize themselves into groups and privilege certain men, and that puts them ahead in the reproductive hierarchy. And so what that means to some degree is that there's a spirit of masculinity that's shaping the entire structure of human evolutionary history. That's what that means. And then I think, okay, well, that might just be a biological epiphenomenon. And so it would be a spirit it's the spirit of positive masculinity that manifests itself across epochal ages, millions of years perhaps. And it actually has shaped our consciousness, actually. And so you can think about that as a figure. And it would be the figure that emerges. It's like the essential spirit of all the great men who defined what greatness constituted. That's a spirit. Okay, now that's a purely biological explanation. You could say, well, that's God for all intents and purposes. You might have an image of that built right into you. Even the sense that you can experience something divine and paternal might be merely a reflection of that evolutionary process. So that would be a biologically reductive argument for the existence of what we experience as God. But then there's another possibility too, which is that that's actually reflective of a deeper metaphysical reality that has to do with the nature of consciousness itself. And I would say that I think that's true. I believe the biological case, and I believe the biologically reductive case, but I don't think that exhausts it. I think that there's a metaphysical layer underneath that the biology is a genuine reflection of. And that's the sort of the macrocosm above and the microcosm below. That we are really reflective, including in our consciousness, of something about the structure of reality itself. And that might involve whatever it is that God is.
Okay, so Pop quiz. What does Jordan Peterson actually believe about God?
Whatever it is, I'm not on enough hard drugs to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I was talking about this with Stefan Bertrand yesterday. This is Revolution, and I maybe somewhat unkindly said it sort of sounded like Peterson was just coming down from a really intense ketamine experience, and he was trying to sum it up and not doing a very good job. But as far as I can tell from the end of it, he says, "Okay, here's this." I mean, I think his grasp on evolutionary biology is not perfect, but let's put that aside because that's not what we're talking about right now. He's got this purely, as he says, reductive, biological, naturalistic explanation for why people believe in God. But then in the last 30 seconds, he remembers that's not supposed to be his position. And he says, well, but there's a metaphysical layer underneath that, But all he could bring himself to say about the metaphysical layer is that there might be something about the structure. It might reflect something about the structure of reality that might have something to do with, this is an exact quote, whatever it is that God is. It's wait a second. What does he believe? Now, here's the good news. Last year, we have a clip of him directly answering the question, do you believe in God?
You know that there are central doctrines to Christianity, like the crucifixion, the ascension, the resurrection, and all the above, right? These are doctrines. All types of Christians will agree with it. Catholics will agree with it. Eastern Orthodox and Protestants. All of them will say you must believe in these doctrines as happening. You cannot believe in them as symbol. You cannot believe. So the reason why this actually is...
So when I hear something like that, then the question that arises for me is, what do you mean happening? And so let me just unpack that a little bit. So I did a lecture last night at the Apollo on the story of Cain and Abel.
Yes.
And one of the things that I proposed was that not only did that story happen, but it's always happening.
Yes.
It always happened. It's happening right now, and it's always going to happen into the future. And so then when I look at a story like Cain and Abel, I think, well, the question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen? Because when you are dealing with fundamental realities and you pose a question, you have to understand that the reality of the concepts of your question, when you're digging that deep, are just as questionable as what you're questioning. So people say to me, do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean except belief in God. And I think, no, if we're going to get down to the fundamental brass tacks, we don't really know what any of those things mean.
This is for the average Peterson fan. I mean, the average one that's over 50, right? Because it's probably under 18 and over 50, as we've discussed. It's their wife asking, did you cheat on me? And you're like, did?
You did. What do you mean? What do
you cheat? We have to define all of these words.
I don't know what look, babe, we're going to have to spend an hour on each of these to even begin to get down to the fundamental brass tacks of this important question.
Yeah, exactly. It's how dare you even ask me that? I the last thing also before we get a little more serious is someone was saying the finger wiggle means that he's about to really drop some pseudoscience because of the lack of shoes. We got to see the rare toe wiggle. His toes were had the same body language. So it's nice to know what's going on in those expensive leather shoes. But that was one of the worst dodges I've maybe ever seen. I don't know what you think, Ben and Andy.
I would say the worst dodge I've seen since Bill Clinton in 1998 when he asked what the definition of is. Same energy.
Yeah. I mean, at least he was only pretending not to know what one word meant. And this is interesting. So, one of the things, so when I talk about in the essay and when I talked about the conversation with Stefan on TIR, and, we don't have to get into the whole thing here. I want to move on, but is if you actually look at Peterson's stated views about truth, he has this kind of weird version of something like pragmatism about truth, although I'm reluctant to even call it that, because I think what he believes is just much dumber, frankly, than like what the classical pragmatists believed. But he, you could listen to this like 2-hour podcast conversation he did several years ago with Sam Harris. Which,
I'll be straight from
yeah,
there.
you'll definitely be doing that as soon as the episode is over. Yeah. If you really want to know, you can listen to that. Look, I don't like Sam Harris. I think he is wrong about a really impressive array of subjects, from, torture to Palestine to free will to metaethics to airport security to, like it just a lot of stuff, right? We actually did an episode once that was literally called Sam Harris is Wrong About Everything, which, is an overstatement, but, captures something. And I have never felt as much sympathy for Sam Harris as I did while I was listening to this conversation, because for so much of it, they're getting hung up on this thing about truth. And Peterson has this weird view that something is true if it like aids in the survival or flourishing of the human race. And Harris is trying to ask him all these obvious follow-up questions, like, okay, if there's like a, chemical weapons lab where they have an accident and something spills out of the water supply and it wipes out the entire human race, does that mean the theory of chemistry they were working with isn't true? And it is like what I say in the essays. It's like 2 hours of listening to like a harried adjunct professor trying and failing to explain something to the world's most confused undergraduate. But like that view about truth should give Peterson a way to just say, yes, God exists, full stop, right? But he never quite does, right? He always says all this weird shit instead, because I think that even though officially he represents, like his official position is he rejects what's called the correspondence theory of truth, the idea that, statements are true if the facts they describe are the way the statement says it is, right, in favor of some kind of weird pragmatism. I think in his heart, he does kind of know that he doesn't believe in God the way that he believes in, whatever, that the crimes of Stalin happened or whatever, like, pick your favorite thing that, you think that Peterson would obviously believe. And if you actually look at this Twitter thread, right, that, hey, atheistic hedonists unconsciously worship Pan, next tweet, or Priapus, family-friendly podcast. I'm not going to explain this one, but look it up. Implicitly worship, if you must. Do you get it yet? My favorite tweet. Do you get it yet? It's never, do you believe in God? It's always, which God do you worship? Consciously or unconsciously. And all I could think is, my dude, like, you are every bit as much of an atheist as I am. Like, the sense in which you're saying everybody believes in or worships a God is like everybody acts in a way that reminds you of that God. It's like, you might as well say it's never, do you believe Hogwarts is real? It's always, which Harry Potter house would you belong to, right? Do you care about, bravery, Gryffindor, I don't know, loyalty, Hufflepuff, whatever the other ones are, like it is literally the equivalent. But the man could not get past his culture war. He is addicted to it. I'm not going to make an addiction joke here because it'd be in bad taste, but it's like, the man cannot wean himself from the culture war. So for culture war reasons, he has to go after atheists. But, you're not fooling anybody, Dr. Peterson, and you don't need to act this way. You can be true to yourself. There's room for all in Pan's congregation. That is where I'll leave this. I will say in the post game, we've got Russell Sbriglia, who has actually written and edited a bunch of stuff with our main show guest, Slavoj Žižek. I saw Russ last weekend. He was at the show in New York, and we're going to follow up on some of the stuff that comes up in the Žižek conversation. We're also going to talk about a article that a couple of other articles that I wrote elsewhere this last week. I'll just briefly mention them right now. So there is the Steven Crowder one that is right-wingers like Steven Crowder need billionaire funders because their ideas are so bad. That's a Jacobin. We'll talk about that in the postgame. We're going to talk about so that's about Steven Crowder's feud with the Daily Wire. Speaking of the Daily Wire, we're going to talk about my run-in with Matt Walsh in the postgame. We are going to get into something I wrote for the Daily Beast about friend of the show Pete Buttigieg and his spectacular mismanagement of the Department of Transportation and attacks on him because of that. And also, if we have time, there's a song that Steve Bannon has about the Chinese Communist Party that's just amazing. So we might watch that in the post game. All of those things, just as a reminder, if you are not a Give Them an Argument patron, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis, $5 a month. You get access to every single patron exclusive post game after the regular episode. You also get Yes Drum, a song about the Chinese Communist Party. It's incredible. So you get those patron exclusive post games, you get the Discord servers. Sometimes we give people early access to interviews, various other kinds of benefits, but most importantly, it's gesture of solidarity. It's a way of supporting the show. If you like what we do, if you want us to keep going, please do consider that. With that out of the way, we have my conversation with Slavoj Žižek is probably going to take us till about what I'm going to play for you, where it ends. It's like there's a little bit of ambiguity about where the conversation ends because I didn't do a good enough job of demarcating, okay, we're done talking now, so that's just pleasantries after that. But where we're going to watch to, at least, we might watch a few more minutes of the post game, but where we're going to watch to at least should take us to about 10:10, I believe. So we're going to end the main show just slightly late, rather, and go to the post game. But we're going to be very close to being on time. So I am going to start that right now. All right. I am now joined by Slavoj Žižek. On YouTube, although I actually did see you in person last year. I won't I won't ask how you're doing. We did a little bit of that off air, before we started. But thank you so much for coming back on.
Thanks very much. It's an honor for me. You are one of the few people who is not only theoretically close to me, but on whom I can ethically rely, and just telling you how are we doing and so on. I am not paranoid, but in a bad mood, so that I didn't wish people all the best in the new year. Yeah. I say much more cautiously. Let's hope that 23 will at least be not much worse than 22, as far as I am ready to go.
It's funny. I usually do wish a bunch of people Happy New Year, and I didn't do very much of that this year, but I should have thought of that. I like that. But yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about a few things today. I just wrote something. I just wrote something about you, so I've been thinking about some of your kind of larger positions.
You have too much freedom. How did you find the time to write that long text on me?
I write quickly. If I didn't, I'd be in trouble.
Yeah.
But I was because I did write that, right? I was thinking about like some of your larger theoretical positions, okay. and I know this is maybe kind of a strange way to start out because I think based on some of our previous interviews, people might expect me to start out by asking you something about what's going on in the world or your positions on that, but I actually, if you'll indulge me, I did want to ask something much more esoteric to start out with, which was about Hegel and Marx, because I've I was hoping that you could clear something up that I've never completely understood about your position, which I think the way to think about it is this, right? So the sort of usual story people tell about Hegelianism and about Marxism is that Hegel has this idealist theory of history. He thinks that, history is like the coming into itself of the world spirit. So there's these non-material factors that are driving everything forward. And then Marx sets Hegel, turns Hegel upside down, turns him upright, something like that, by retaining the structure of Hegel's ideas, but doing a materialist version of it. And I've heard you say things over the years like you want to set back, you want to turn Hegel around again, or you want to reverse that in some way, or you want to complicate that in some way. And I have to admit, I've never been entirely clear on how that position works. So if that's not, I understand I'm asking you a giant question. You've written, several books about this stuff, but if that's not too general, I was wondering if you could clarify what your position is on that.
I am grateful for this question, and sorry, you know that the only way I recognize somebody as a friend is to make a bad taste jokes or comparisons, comparing them with. So I love this question because you remind me of, sorry, I know you're not this, stupid Hollywood producers who I was told, I read in old books on Hollywood when I was young, a guy came to them with, I have a wonderful scenario, blah, blah, and they tell them, give me just a punchline, 2-3 sentences. I cannot grasp more, so you are asking me this basically.
Yeah. Give me the elevator pitch
for your Hollywood producer.
Yeah, exactly. Good
Perfect.
Thing. Just long enough for an elevator ride. Give me that much of your view on this subject you spent all this book talking about.
Yeah. First, of course, Hegel's at least historical limits are clear, and I emphasize this. First, something happened in the 19th century. Not so much this vulgar materialism, science, and so on, but in sciences, a certain logic of, let's call it mechanic determinism, and I'm talking here even about purely scientific notions like, entropy or energy, how this idea of mechanized energy in the sense that it goes on just on pure mechanical repetition, all that stuff which characterize scientific materialism. And I'm not mocking it. It has its greatness. This was the science of the big science, natural science of the 19th century. Hegel was out of this. And as some guys, very intelligent readers of Marx, pointed out, even when Marx is problematic today, for example, in his so-called labor theory of value, as that I buy, but especially his, how should I call it, mechanicist reductionism, where Marx advocates the position that higher complex labor of an engineer or whatever is simply a multiplication of simple elementary level. At the low level elementary value of labor is measured by the time you spend on it. But okay, what if you get a highly educated guy who does the plan for your machine, blah, blah, blah? Obviously, at least in some naive sense, his work produces more, contributes more to the value. Marxist answer is this reduction in typical 19th century style. You know that you just have to multiply it. Let's say 1 hour of...
Marx says something in Capital like skilled labor is multiplied. It can be reduced to unskilled labor but he uses some strange phrase like by a well-known process that he never says what well-known process is.
I'm written about it. You know, a great Marxist, maybe the greatest in economic matters today. Our friend, I hope I can say, David Harvey, no? I hope you took this remark from, because David Harvey does a wonderful, almost Freudian analysis here, because Marx uses the term, as you said, by a well-known process, it's obvious or what, and Harvey asks, sorry, in what sense well-known? Who did at any point not only develop this, but even mention it, you know? So this is typical empty rhetoric. You don't have good arguments, so you say, oh, it's well known, and so on. No? But I think the origin of this is Marx's reliance on the notion of energy, constant energy, which is, again, a typical product of post-Hegelian mechanical materialism. So, but here I don't mean this as a criticism of Marx. On the contrary, I think that this mechanic logic is inscribed into capitalism itself. This brings me to the second point, and I elaborate this paradox, I forgot in which one of my books where I deal with this Marx-Hegel topic, that the most intelligent, I found it elsewhere, it's not mine, argument for a moderate critique of Marx and Hegel is that the problem with Hegel is that because of, but maybe it's more, obvious social limitation of his time, Hegel was not Hegelian enough when dealing with capitalist production. Hegel, if you read him carefully, he differentiates between three Stände, states. This allgemeine, universal state, state functionaries, and so on, then farmers, and in between commerce, laborers, and so on. But they are all one and the same big group. The idea of an immanent antagonism here is foreign to Hegel, which is why in all the dynamics that Hegel saw very well, Hegel, as we know, was reading Adam Smith and so on, all of them, even Ricardo, Hegel still conceives this civil society as the sphere of economy at the level of collaboration between individuals on the market. I produce something, you produce something else, we exchange it, okay, one gets richer than the other. But this crucial dialectical idea of working force itself becoming one of the commodities. Hegel should have seen this because this is precisely the most dialectical moment of reflexivity, where, let us say, I will be fair towards you, I produce something, you produce something, but then you get wealthier, so that instead of buying things from me, because I screwed it up, now I'm giving you a standard bourgeois version, because of working well, blah, blah, I screwed it up with my laziness, you work hardly, so you no longer buy things for me, you buy me, not as a slave, but my labor force, you know. And this is Marx's precise definition. Capitalism emerges when the source of value, labor, becomes another commodity on the market. This Hegel didn't see. And we go on. So that's a beautiful paradox. This, I think, I invented it, and I'm very little proud of it. That the problem of Hegel was that confronting capitalism at a very elementary stage, still, he wasn't Hegelian enough. What Marx did in Capital was Hegelianizing the critique of political economy. When Marx describes, that's the classical example, the passage from money as commodity to capital, he puts it in purely Hegelian terms of how substance becomes subject. Money in its pre-capitalist mode, it's a neutral means of exchange. We use it to exchange, to satisfy the objects, to satisfy commodities, to satisfy our needs, and so on and so on. But what happens in capitalism is that capital becomes the active agent. The goal of the production is not satisfying our needs, not even rich people making them richer. It is simply the expanded self-reproduction of capital itself. And again, Marx literally describes this in Hegelian terms, which is why, as I don't agree with them, some new breed of scholars who deal with Marx and Hegel point out that early Marx still thought Hegel, blah, blah, idealist, speculation, and so on. But the big breakthrough of Marx, who was, again, until, let's say, early 1950s, mostly mocking, making fun of Hegel as the, not stupid, but an idealist who is confusing things, blah, blah, that Marx then discovered, but my God, there is a domain which in our lowest, in the sense the most brutal material, reality, which behaves exactly in the way Hegelian spirit or Hegelian notion behaves, in the sense of self-movement, self-reproduction, self-sublation of, and this is the movement of capital. So that's the beauty of Marx. Then he went on, but his basic discovery is that capital is structured as a Hegelian notion. There is, even if you as a single capitalist or whatever are a vulgar materialist, you want only profit, pleasures, whatever, in your practice you are idealist, in the sense that economy in which you participate, collaborate, behaves in a Hegelian way. So this is my basic position. I'm not simply saying, let's go back from Marx to Hegel. So this is one aspect. The other aspect connected with it is that now comes the big shock. I will be very short here. And I'm here not alone. There are many Hegelians with whom I don't agree, from Robert Brandom to Pippin and so on, who agree here with me. Now I will put the paradox at its purest. You must know it. Marx is, in some basic sense, more idealist than Hegel. In what sense? Yes, Hegel describes history in a very teleological way. He even has this vulgar evolutionism, like it began for Hegel, he is here, a typical Eurocentric racist. Africa is zero level, they're not even purely human. Humanity begins with China, where only one is free, or India, then in Persia, Manichaeism, and so on. Some are free, and in ancient Greece, with Christianity, all are free, but this is limited to religious sphere and in modern Western Europe, all are free. Do you know what is happening now? Did we already talk about this? I like this idea, although I think with Hegel it's more complicated, because you know who were, I think we already talked about it. I'm sorry if I repeat myself. You know who were the first American Hegelians? St. Louis School. A couple of German high school professors from Germany who even established the first Hegelian journal there in St. Louis around 1850-55. They tried to think further than Hegel. They said since Hegel came a couple of decades earlier, he thought England, France, Germany, that's it, the top. But then the spirit moved further west to United States. First, it was the primitive level New York, and then for them, it was St. Louis. And their end was a total historical accident that they detected the right movement, but Chicago took over St. Louis, you know. And then do you know that you have then some Californian Hegelians who made a step further and said, no, you know, when now California is kind of a losing value. It's no longer such an ideal of postmodern society. They said, no, let's go to the end. It's Western of the United States. That's the top. True postmodern society. Like if Baudrillard were to say the ultimate Hegelian place is California. But then already in the 60s, it was Kojève who proposed as an ideal after its economic rise in 1960s, Japan. That Japan is a truly post-historical society where, you know, it's no longer even obsessed with economic wealth. It's more this enjoying everyday rituals, nice manners, and so on. And then I love them. There are some of my friends in China today. They said, no, to be truly Hegelian, you have to make a full circle. We are back to China, where it all began. That only this. So why I mentioned this, sorry for the loss of time, because of a very precise reason.
Okay.
Because I think this entire logic is false. Yes, Hegel proposes a teleological model, but he makes it very clear that this model is not simply universal. This is how things appear to us from our standpoint. Hegel would have totally prohibited, not would have, he does prohibit it, what Marx does, any teleological speculations about the future. You remember the lines that I always quote from Hegel's introduction or forward, I always forget, to Philosophy of Right, where he said a science, philosophical science, can only grasp social formation insofar as this formation has already reached its peak and began to decay, and we cannot go into future. So this idea to see yourself as a moment in the process towards a higher level, the process which is still ongoing, this is for Hegel too much idealism. Hegel would have said precisely, Marx thinks that he can locate ourselves in a teleological line, moving not with necessity, it's open to catastrophe, but nonetheless towards socialism, communism, and so on. So I think that this is where we need to return to Hegel. He is teleologist, but he, now I will use a very precise term, he dislocates teleology itself. It's this would be a proper Hegelian way to say it, and Marx would agree with him here. It's not just that history progresses in ancient China or this primitive, so-called primitive Oriental absolutist country. Only one was free. Then a couple of people are free. Then now, formally, of course, all are free, and so on and so on. No, Hegel would have put it in a different way. You cannot say that in historical progress we are more and more approaching a certain notion. No, it's that this notion itself gets redefined. And I think precisely that's why Hegel would not have dismissed all these issues of LGBT plus and so on as irrelevant. He would have said, you see, that's historical progress where we are not getting, it may appear, approaching a more just egalitarian society, but the very content of freedom, justice, equality is changing historically. If you take into account LGBT plus and so on, a whole new sphere of egalitarian freedom emerges. And here already we get socialism, because again, the break of socialism from classical liberalism is not, oh, totalitarian organization of economy. It's, yes, we are for equality, but to be actually equal, certain economic and social conditions must be met. We know today what they are. Free or accessible to all healthcare, education, and all that. So this is what Hegel means when he says that with historical development, the notion itself is caught into this development. We are now not more free than ancient Greeks. We understand freedom in a different way. So here I think Hegel is to be reactualized. I think we have to renounce this too simplistic, maybe Marxist belief in historical teleology that we are approaching and so on. I don't know. I am more of a Walter Benjamin pessimist, which is neither Hegel nor Marx. That if anything, the spontaneous not in the sense of mechanic, but in the sense of history, our history led to itself, to its own dynamic, is approaching some apocalyptic endpoint. And precisely, we no longer can afford to trust history. We have to act against.
Yeah, I mean, so there's an interesting issue here because, you know, when you're talking about redefining freedom, and I mean, what the, you know, it seems to be the kind of freedom that Marx cares the most about is, you know, freedom to pursue your own self-directed projects, to do with what you want, you know, with your time. I mean, like in Capital, I mean, he always, you know, he talks about workers, you know, producing surplus value, but I mean, what he's most concerned with is surplus time, you know, that you have how much you know, how much time you have to work for the capitalist after you're done working for yourself. And it seems, and so if Marx is ultimately, you know, interested in creating a society where people have you know, where people have the most ability to as I said, pursue their own projects, to you know, to spend their time as, you know, as they want, etc., then, you know, the way where the historical teleology comes in is at least this, right? That like that you have that as the forces of production develop, the ability of a society to produce stuff that, you know, that you've created the possibility, at least, for people to be, more than just formally free, that they can have a society with enough abundance that people could be free in this deeper
Yes,
sense. That
I
they don't have
agree
to
with
spend
you,
all their
but again,
time working.
sorry.
But what I'm curious about is, you kind of mentioned at the end of what you were saying, you were talking about disasters and and all of that. Like, there's seems to me that now a lot of people who might even be influenced by the Marxist tradition or might think of themselves as Marxists have a view that is kind of the opposite of Marx's here. That, in other words, that because of the looming threat of ecological catastrophe, we need to actually roll back the development of the forces of production. That like we need degrowth or something like that. And I am curious. I mean, this is like, because in some ways maybe that rhymes with the kinds of things that you say sometimes, that that you'll often say that in response to some crisis or another, we need you'll sort of semi-playfully say like war communism, I remember in one of your conversations with Michael Brooks a few years ago, you said something about war communism with Julian Assange characteristics, which I took to mean like okay, it's important that we protect civil liberties, and but nevertheless, you need some kind of regimentation of society to deal with this crisis, and I guess the other, sorry, there's so many threads of what you just said. I just wanted to pick out a couple of them here. I think that one place, if you think about that kind of division between like, okay, are we imagining a sort of Star Trek communist future where we have material abundance to go around for everybody, or are we imagining this kind of regimented sort of we have to ration everything because it's because of the fear of ecological catastrophe future? That one place where you might really question the way in which classical Marxism is teleological, that there is still supposed to, that, as you said, it's not completely teleological because you allow for the possibility of disaster and things going backwards, but the idea that there's just one direction forwards, I think you could question that now for a lot of reasons. I mean, this is I mean, the whole experience of what used to be called actually existing socialism in the 20th century, you might see as indicating that we like, it's not that there's only one possible future that's just waiting for us to discover it. That there are like a lot of different branches in which even after capitalism things could go, and you have to decide which one you want. Like, I always think of my friend Bhaskar said something kind of funny once a few years ago about how people make a big deal about how just before the Russian Revolution, Lenin was rereading Hegel. He was reading the Science of Logic, I think, and people bring this up as this big, profound thing. And I remember Bhaskar said, no, he shouldn't have been doing that. He should have been spending his time reading economics or military strategy or something that would have actually helped them build this new Soviet state and and do a better job, right? Which is the sort of thing that I think points to this question, right? In other words, okay, so I know we're a little distant from where we started about the relationship between Marx and Hegel, but I think in some ways maybe it's the same question. I mean, how much to what extent do you think we have to actually consciously decide what kind of future society we want, and to what extent do you think that is constrained by these kinds of ecological concerns that lead even some socialists to think, oh, we don't get the society of material abundance after all? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But let me try to answer at different levels. First, just I cannot resist mentioning this. When I mention war communism, people are saying, oh, he's crazy, another of my postmodern madness. But that I read recently when in Western Europe, in my I don't know how is it with you, but you have it privatized. Those who get it, get it. Those who don't get it. What? Healthcare.
Mhm.
But the big point of pride of what Sloterdijk called objective social democracy, social democratic measures inscribed into the very social and economic structure of a state. That's maybe, if you ask me, the greatest achievement of so-called, with all its limitation, welfare state, capitalism, however we call it. That it doesn't even matter who is in power. Like the idea that everybody has to have access to healthcare is simply part of a basic social pact. It's inscribed in state institutions and so on and so on, although, as we know, this gets under threat today. But what I'm saying is that look at healthcare. What is happening now in Western Europe, not just in some, if I may mention ironically this term, of course I disagree with it, Latino, confused, corrupted southern countries, Balkan, Italy, Spain, but in our secret ideal northern countries, or this triad, Germany, France, UK, you must have read about it. Healthcare is in such a crisis now, and ordinary people feel it. They still have some kind of a national healthcare system, but it works less and less, even in my country. If you want to have done it fast, you have to pay. Otherwise, you wait, and you wait. I thought it was a scandal in Slovenia, my own country, when it happened a couple of weeks ago. An old guy, 98 years old, had a heart trouble, in a panic, went there, and he was put under, okay, you have priority, and nonetheless waited for 20 hours and almost died. It simply doesn't work. We have other problems, but the point is that the system is falling apart. Then I thought, in a typical self-denigrating way, yeah, that's we Slovenes. But then I learned in Germany, it's no longer really working. 300 key medicines, pills, and so on are lacking. A friend from Sweden told me his mother had heart problems. She waited for 20 hours at an emergency, not to mention United Kingdom, where everything is falling apart. They try to cover it up with statistics, but it doesn't work. And here, it's simply, they admit it more and more, it's simply no time to say, okay, let's give more money, allow market mechanisms to do it. We don't, even if it were to be possible, but it's not, we don't have time. Now I go a step further. It's not even time to say, yes, we will reorganize the system and wait. This also takes a year or 2 or 3. So Simon Jenkins and some other British commentators, you know what term, you can imagine how I got an intellectual orgasm. They used the term war conditions. They said this is a wartime crisis. You know that in United Kingdom, 7 million people are waiting for specialist exam with no serious chance to get it in some reasonable time. This is full-blown crisis where the only thing that would have worked is some kind of very brutal, militarized almost intervention. You say, no, reorganize it, doctors become like soldiers. You have to work here. You have to do this. This doesn't solve the problem. But in some countries, the situation is so serious that you don't have time to this comfortable reflection, how to solve that. You have to do something now. And what I am afraid is that not just Ukraine war, but healthcare, problems with agriculture, all the stuff. We will need this kind of emergency measures. That's what I mean by it. When I say war communism, it's not that I'm a totalitarian. I'm just saying that I'm not the old-fashioned optimist communist. Oh, it will be time of abundance and so on and so on. No, it will be a kind of a change done out of bare necessity. Next thing, speaking about ecology, here it may surprise you. I wouldn't underestimate Marx too much here. Yes, we have this naively progressive Marx. Sometimes he even says, applying this to primitive dialectic of means of production and relations of production, that now in late capitalism, the relations of production are becoming an obstacle to further development of the means of production. So we need socialism to make growth again explosive. As if in socialism we will be back to full progress and so on and so on. But it gets complicated, because I would advise to those who will see us or at least listen to us, the Japanese young eco-Marxist called, maybe you should invite him, Kohei Saito.
Okay.
He is now a mega bestseller in Japan itself, doing very well more and more in the West. His book, a short, very clear book, clearly written, is Eco-Socialism, where he points out how, people talk as if the young Marx too primitive and then all those Grundrisse capital speculations, that's it. No, Marx didn't finish Capital because in the last 10 years of his life, he was obsessed by ecological problems, especially by imbalance between countryside and towns. It was a very naive, clear idea that in a primitive, but this time in a good sense, all the excrements you feed, all the rubbish, remains there, goes back to the land, you have fertilization and so on and so on. But that with this gap between countryside and cities, the organic stuff gets sucked out of the earth, and the excrements and all that possible fertilizers are getting rid of through canalization, blah, blah. And he developed this in detail, how this was a mega problem already in 1850s, 60s, when, how do they call this? Something, the birch shit on the coast of Peru was the best fertilizers. And the British and German organized enormous system, although not formally slave of slavery, where tens of thousands of people, mostly Chinese, worked to death, were putting this bird shit on gigantic heaps on boats to bring them to Europe. And this is literally what saved, more or less, European agriculture. And Marx worked immensely of this, reading all, not so much biologists as this, how to call it, specialists for soil and air. Some Germans especially wrote very substantial stuff out of this. So again, don't underestimate Marx here. What I would just say is that, where I find Marx problematic, if you cut all the crap, but the good crap about democratic cooperation, anarchist, here I'm using the term in a good way, anarchist, local self-organization, what all this model allow are two things, are not only transparent system, but at the same time a place for spontaneous interaction. We cooperate, something new may emerge, but not as imposed from above. And nonetheless, till the end, in Marx, the model is secretly the one of self-transparent, centrally planned society.
Mm-hmm.
Marx underestimated what I ironically like to call the good alienation. You know, human life is not just
happened there. So the last thing I heard before whatever we got kicked off was the good alienation.
Yeah, no, the good alienation in the simple sense that take language. You don't control language. You have to blindly rely on certain mechanisms. You don't control it also in the basic sense that you want to say something, it can be misinterpreted. You know, this language as an autonomy. So this would be my argument connected with another one. I now found a quote from late Engels, who was very honest, intelligent, so many things, but he's thinking about highly developed socialism and then communism. He says, he repeats this old formula taken from the Bible, of course, that to everyone gives according to his abilities, to everyone according to his needs. And Engels paraphrases this, everybody gets according to his reasonable desires.
Yes.
Now, as a Freudian, you know, I explode here. No, desires are not reasonable in any elementary sense. Look at Germany. Yes, as Marxists, we should say Hitler had to practice anti-Semitism to find an external enemy, no? So to mask social antagonism. But then he played this game very seriously in the sense that from the standpoint of economic reasoning, it was totally irrational. Like, I know what I'm talking about. I read history in early 44, even before the, let's call them, but they were the worst, rational Nazis, like Albert Speer, said, this is crazy that we are killing Jews. There are many specialists there, able men. Why don't we use them much more as slave workers instead of killing them? You know, and in this way, make our economy stronger, have more people to fight, more soldiers, and the hardline Nazis in a totally irrational way rejected this, which was a catastrophe. So if you look at the history or look at today's war, yes, there are cynical pragmatists who said, forget all that bullshit, Dugin, history, fate, greatness. What Russia really wants is expansion, more space, and so on and so on. But nonetheless, ideology is never just ideology. It has material consequences. So did you see it was on TV a week or so ago, one of the people close to Putin, Solovyov, I think, had a speech where he said pure fundamentalism. In Iran, you wouldn't have heard something like this. He said, go fight and don't care if you die. He said, because death doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is courage and immortality. Yeah. And all other things are illusions, and so on and so on. So I don't buy this logic of, they're just saying this, you know. No, words are never just words. So here, I still trust the basic description of capitalist dynamic by Marx. But my God, if you have some links with those anarchists and so on, here I agree with them. They saw this clearly, that there is a certain tendency in Marx, you know, which leads the way, I wouldn't say Stalinism, but this idea of self-transparent, well-organized society. This is a problem today. The last thing, it's so important, I'm not kidding what we are talking about today. It's very important what you said, which model will there be? Now I read a book, I don't agree with it. I still find what goes on in China as very problematic. Mm-hmm. But it's a book which is, do you know the guy, Roland Baer, B-A-E-R, I don't know how to pronounce it. He's a European, originally theologist, who then got totally converted to Chinese Marxism and now teaches philosophy in Dalian, a big northern, close to Korea, Chinese city, and wrote a book, Socialism with Chinese Characteristics, where, you know, if you read it, what he claims, it's almost what really should have been done. He said that Chinese saw that only capitalist competition brings productivity, but at the same time, they saw that if market is left to itself, it leads to moral decay, self-destruction. So what they try to do is to have the state, and then, I don't believe this guy, Roland, reproduces all the Chinese mythology of how the state in China is very democratic. You have always collaboration, debate with people, even at the lowest level. That through all these social and ecological interests are realized in the sense that the state power sets certain limits to market, either direct limits or indirect limits in the sense of intervening into the market in the interest of society. Now, my problem is, if this were to be true, it's almost a realistic vision of what should be done. Because I wouldn't underestimate this awareness of crisis of capitalism. I did just want to intervene here because I think the example about China, takes us back to what I was asking you earlier about different models of non-capitalist societies, because on the one hand, China is like horrifically economically unequal, and it's also a surveillance state. And those things are very bad. But on the other hand, there is a certain way of describing the Chinese model that does actually sound like the sorts of things that thoughtful socialists who think that, okay, maybe we can't have, just sort of Gosplan style, Soviet economic planning, that didn't work. And so, but you could at least have a lot of state
direction of the sort of overall flow of the economy at the commanded heights of the economy, while still allowing some market mechanisms down
Yeah,
below.
but you know what the Chinese
A lot of that
model
does
is?
sound like
Yeah.
what China actually
And
has.
what's intelligent is that you know that in spite of all the talk about oligarchs, billionaires, over 60% of economy is still in state hands.
Yeah.
And their idea is that even these big companies owned by state should go through the test of market, so that you don't get too much into corruption and so on and so on and so on. The problem for me is that obviously it doesn't really work. Look at the latest COVID crisis. Maybe they will succeed, but you see all this dissatisfaction among ordinary people. It had to explode into open, violent protests. The system was not able to register and integrate it properly. So now I'm asking in a totally naive way, can we keep this Chinese idea of, yes, limited use of market, but not as the deciding agency? Some kind of, and all the problem is what kind of? Can we avoid authoritarian state here? Some kind of social organization force takes into account social interests, potential social tensions, and so on, and sets limits to it, regulates it, and so on and so on. And here, I must tell you, although I'm horrified by many things that she, the new president, is doing, here maybe we don't pay enough attention to what he is effectively doing and saying. It's not all bad. On the one hand, he says it clearly. In the wild 90s and later, when we were playing too much a capitalist game, as you just said, social distinction, class distinction exploded. Now he said something very nice. He said that in the choice between growth and social solidarity, we neglected social solidarity. And we should risk now even to lower our growth if the result can be abolishing more poverty, bringing more welfare to ordinary people. This is his big motto. It's not just what we read in the newspapers, we want Taiwan war and so on and so on. His big obsession is the same as with Deng Xiaoping. Socialism will not work without a certain basic safety and welfare of the mass of ordinary people. And this cannot be simply achieved just through the market. And aren't we now, just to finish, in the West, approaching a similar insight? Let me just give you this insight and then where I see the problem. Did you read all the, for example, apropos Davos, did you read, was it reported by you that 200 top billionaires, millionaires, public persons said, we want higher taxes. And I don't think this was benevolence. They became vaguely aware that if the ongoing social tensions go on, they will also pay the consequences. Financial Times, the voice of big financial capital, said also capitalism needs a fundamental radical change, and so on and so on. Now, it would be easy to dismiss this as blah, 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 empty talk. No, it's important that we start to talk about it, because hypocritical as they may be, such interventions create a good atmosphere where you are expected to question not just this point of corruption, blah, 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 but capitalist, what's wrong with the system? What I am afraid is just my old insight into cynical functioning of ideology, that in the same way as with ecology, where we all the time talk about ecological threat, but if you look basically at what is going on, it's pretty close to zero. But I think that if we will not find a way towards this type of, now again, I will propose another Assange war communism formula, like more democratic, not necessarily in the sense of Western multi-party democracy, but in a very simple sense that in whatever way, the voice of the people should be heard, not just heard, but taken into account. If we don't do this, then we will be in the world of Trump and Russia. You know what worries me in Russia now? Not only Putin occupying Ukraine, but my God, poor Russians themselves. Did people notice something which worries me so much, my God, that now allegedly there is a war for succession going on? Who comes after Putin, blah, blah. But how is this struggle going on? It should have been a normal struggle of not necessarily multi-party, but, different orientations, different political agents debating, blah, blah, blah. But what is happening now in Russia is that more and more a totally non-transparent conflict between what they call oligarchs, even warlords. Who is this Prigozhin, whom now even Putin tries to limit? Prigozhin, the guy who owns the Wagner Group. Wagner Group, which is a private mercenary army and the most effective part of Russian army, he is what we call a warlord. And warlords are something that we usually ironically describe as, this belongs to primitive third world countries. Yeah, Congo, yeah, I don't know where. No, we get them in Russia. This worries me very, very much.
Yeah, I mean, it is worrying. I mean, of course, there is a question here on which I think we disagree about how to think about what the end game is for the conflict with Russia right now, right? Because I hear people talk about sort of inflicting total defeat, but what would that actually?
I know that. I'm very careful. Sorry to interrupt you, because I'm often accused of this. No, I more and more reconnecting with friends in Russia.
Yeah.
More and more, I agree with a wise formula proposed by Habermas.
Yeah.
Let's not two things. First, let's not put it in these aggressive terms, or as Boris Johnson put it, Russia must not only be defeated, but it must be seen to be defeated. Like public humiliation. No, I think that what's the situation in Russia? Yes, there is a percentage, don't underestimate it, of those who oppose war. They are not all good guys, by the way. There are also oligarchs in whose interest this war is not. Then there are fanatical nationalists, blah, blah, blah. But the majority are confused people in a mess and don't write them off. Don't treat them as potential traitors or whatever. So Russia itself is in a terrible state. And I agree with those who claim that our main goal should be not necessarily in the way we understand democracy, but a more relaxed, open, economically efficient Russia. Second
Sure,
thing,
but you know,
just a second to finish.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wouldn't talk so much about defeating Russia. I'm using a much more precise term. Ukraine should somehow survive. It's a much more modest term.
no,
you know.
for sure. I mean,
That's it. That's it. In what form and so on.
absolutely. But I mean, my, worry would be, okay, is it in the interests of Ukraine or anybody else around Russia if, if like there is a scenario and like what you said about warlords and all that kind of gets us here, sometimes, when I hear people say we can't have any kind of de-escalation or peace negotiations, you just have to need to keep pressing for a more total victory. I worry about what that total victory realistically looks like. I mean, do you want? I mean, because Russia is still, I think, has the world's largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, and even apart from that, it's a that it's a even though it's such a dystopic mess in a lot of ways, it is a imagining a state like that becoming a failed state, just somehow internally collapsing that would be I think have really chilling consequences. I mean, even if we can avoid, the worst end of the consequences would be like World War III. But even if you take that off the table, the consequences
I agree here with you. But on the other hand, where I see some good new trends, it may surprise you.
Yeah.
In Ukraine, did you see what Zelensky is doing now? A purge against corruption. Finally. Till now, Ukraine was forced, maybe, I don't know why, to live with most of the corruption was intact and even given a new boost by all this Western help, which is, it's not transparent where many of these arms then end up and so on and so on. But what is happening now is that they are firing many people in high posts, like the second person in Ministry of Defense was fired, maybe even arrested, and so on and so on. I see this as a good sign that they will see that playing not only the Western game, but the hardline Western game. By this I mean the so-called Visegrad group, Poland and so on, would be a catastrophe. What is my fear? That Ukraine survives, more or less intact, okay, maybe some compromises, but becomes, together with Poland and Hungary, although now they have bad relations with Hungary, part of this, let's call it Trumpian Eastern Europe, against LGBT, against those liberal values for which nonetheless we should fight. This is for me a big.
Well, I mean, I did see. I mean, because I think that a lot of times, in the West, we talk about Russia and Ukraine in these terms that that suggest that Ukraine is like a Western European style democracy in a way that it really isn't quite, right? I mean, this is the
not only this. Sorry to interrupt you. Can I go even a step further?
Yeah.
I hope you as a leftist will agree here with me.
Sure.
First, the problem is that many Western liberal democracies are not elite.
Oh, well, that's true too. Yes, of course, right? But they have but there is a spectrum.
Don't forget that till this war, Ukraine was arguably, and I heard this from my Ukrainian friends who are leftists but not Russian agents, it was arguably the most corrupted country of all post-Soviet countries. Even that Maidan revolution, although it was an authentic rebellion, but behind it was a conflict between two groups of oligarchs, pro-Western and pro-Russian. So no, absolutely not. Not only is Ukraine, and I see this here, corrupted. You know how many rich Ukrainians, they're a legend now in Ljubljana in Slovenia. There are a couple of thousands of them with their young sons, by young I mean 20, 25 years, living in expensive hotels and so on and so on. Oh, why don't they go to fight there, my God, and so on, you know. What I am afraid is that rich people, oligarchs, took care of themselves and ordinary people are mobilized to fight and so on and so on. Not to mention the thing about which I already talked, about how we don't read a lot of this, but how, yes, the West is giving help, but is conditioning this help with buying the best lands, neoliberal measures, blah, 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 and all that. Already now, the war, the conflict is going on. Conflict about what will be post-war Ukraine. And the choice is very sad. It is either a pro-Russian protectorate or a kind of a second-level state to be colonized, at least economically, by Western Europe and United States. You know, we should all the time emphasize this. No, I agree with you. I'm not saying not only that Ukraine is not a liberal Western state, but also, as I already wrote many times, I hate this terminology because there, the West, some of them speaks the same language as Dugin, that is Russian truth versus European truth. Sorry, what European truth? Adolf Hitler is pure Europe. There is nothing Asian.
Well, I remember I watched a year or two ago. I watched this debate that Dugin. I guess it must have been a couple years ago because it wouldn't have happened last year. So a couple years ago, I watched this debate that Dugin did with Bernard
Henri Levy, probably.
Yeah. And
Amsterdam, I know.
I don't, I don't like either of those people as far as I'm concerned. This is the Iran-Iraq war of debates. But what interested me about it was that Dugin in arguing for this kind of extreme reactionary sort of semi-fascist view of like how he actually said at one point that individuals don't have any more rights against the state than my limbs have against my body, like just insane shit like this. That in arguing for that, he didn't do it by saying like, this was all laid down by God or something like that. What he actually did was he said he just openly embraced postmodern relativism and said like, oh, well, look, you have your Western values. That's fine for you. You can have those, right? We have our Russian values. And it was just blatantly this.
But you know what's the problem with Dugin here? I know he is self-inconsistent and cheating here because he says this postmodern cultural relativism, but when he says, and he also speaks now this language, the West is the domain of Satan. It has to be not only denazified, but de-demonized and so on. Is this only his Russian view? No, he speaks as if he is at a universal position where he says, we are the good guys, they are the bad guys. Would he accept that we in the West can say the same? No, he is cheating here because he says it's only our truth, but then he nonetheless treats his own truth as universal. Because only in this way can he pass the judgment that he does on the liberal West.
Yeah,
that's sad. You know what's so sad? It's not that he is authoritarian, but you don't agree with them, my secret authoritarian tendencies, no? And from that standpoint, I'm worried about people like Dugin. Their interventions really create chaos. the Russia his influence created is a confused mixture of oligarchs and warlords and so on, which also have, each of them has his or her own truth, you know.
Yeah. No.
The tragedy is that Russia itself, which could have been a model of Putin, once indicated this. I almost sympathized with Putin, almost, not seriously. When he says, look at Russia. We are multinational. We have Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, whatever, and we try to propose a frame where if they all respect just some basic constitutional values, they can all exist together. This is the future of Russia, I think, if he were to mean it truly. But unfortunately, again, then all this orthodox fanaticism enters the game, and so on and so on.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. So, okay, first of all, before we go on, I just want to make sure I'm being respectful of your time. Do you have maybe 20 more minutes?
20 is a little bit more. Let's keep it to 10 if you can.
Let's keep it to 10. Okay, in that case, let's keep this succinct. So, I wanted to give you a chance to address a little bit about some recent criticisms. I feel like, maybe every year or two, there's a often even in a left-wing magazine, somebody will come out with some sort of sweeping Slavoj Žižek is horrible. Actually, you shouldn't listen to him article. I've read versions of this in different places.
But did you notice that now there are two? One is this Rockwell guy, court jester of whatever, global capitalism.
Yeah.
But at the same time, all the time I found another in some nationalist reviewer say, Slavoj Žižek, intelligent, dangerous proponent of Marxist terror.
well, this is one of the things I was going to ask you about, because anyway, you said something interesting earlier, which we probably don't have time to follow up on, about democracy, and doesn't necessarily have to be Western style multi-party democracy. And I think there are a lot of interesting ways to push on that. But I do just want to say, like, it seems to me that some of what I found, one of the things that I found interesting about the Rockhill one that you mentioned, or some other recent critiques, is that there the criticism is exactly the opposite of what I remember it being in many places, even the ones that would arise from within the socialist left, in say 2021, where it would be, or I don't know, 2019 or something, where it used to be that the problem with you is that you were soft on Stalinism. That actually you had some sort of nostalgia or affinity for authoritarian capital C communism. And now it seems to me that that it's almost not almost, it's completely reversed. That now it's that even aside from the sorts of disagreements that we were just talking about, possibly about Ukraine and subjects related to that, it's like no, actually this guy has been a stooge of the CIA, of Western imperialism, for going back to the 1980s, maybe even that as a dissident in Slovenia, and it does seem to me that what both of these sort of miss, and and I'm speaking at a very general level here, because if the issue is, okay, what position did you take on this or that particular event that happened, we can have an argument about that, right? But they have but on a very general level, it does seem to me that that you have had a fairly consistent position that is neither of those things, that you were critical in in the 80s of the authoritarian aspects of Slovenia's system, but not from any sort of perspective of advocating neoliberal economic restructuring, and that and that more recently, I mean, you've been equally critical of the excesses of the national security state in the West. I've heard you speak about Julian Assange and Edward Snowden on many occasions, and while also opposing, also supporting the things that were going against economic neoliberalism, like the Bernie Sanders campaigns in the United States, or Jeremy Corbyn in his time in leadership of the Labour Party in Great Britain, or Occupy Wall Street, or etc. So this does, I think that there are more honest criticisms that could be made, that would be like, well, here's why this doesn't go far enough, or here's why this is flawed in this or that way. But that does seem like
but you know what always bothers me? When people say this doesn't go far enough.
Yeah.
Okay, give me a model of how to go further in a realistic way. This is very brutal, I will say now. Yes, it's easy to constitute, like, do they still exist? That, how is he called? My God, that strange small American communist party, which are purely Maoist and so on.
Oh,
and
small Maoist American, like the RCP, the Revolutionary Communist Party. Is that who you mean? Or,
yeah. Like, for me, it's very comfortable position. Very well that you will achieve nothing, and you just can enjoy your radicalism. I think that
I wrote a book about that.
Yeah, I know. So that's, don't you agree that here I agree, my God, even with Chomsky, that the situation is too serious. We don't have time to be elitist and just wait for an authentic revolution, which will finally come at its purest. Many of my leftist friends, their entire, what in my Lacanian jargon I would have called surplus enjoyment, is that whenever something new happened, like I remember when there was Syriza, we all expected it will fail, but it was something unique, a mass movement, tremendous self-organization of civil society. The tragedy is that they in power, they crashed this civil society. But nonetheless, it was something unique. And then people were telling me, what an idiot, did you really think that something will happen? Like, I don't care. One has naively to support such movements unconditionally. The same with, I will tell you something very sad. With my friends, I'm now editing a volume of texts. He's a very good theoretician. We talked about him, a text by Alvaro Garcia Linera, Morales vice president in Bolivia. And you know that we offered it all around, from Verso to Polity Press, I don't know where, to these small leftist presses. And the reaction was, no, when he was vice president, he made too many compromises. Not. No, they didn't want him. But my God, look, he's a heroic, I know this from personal rumors which are truthful. He was tortured savagely. He went through that violent state. And this, what they did under Morales, was a miracle without ruining the economy, the standard of the ordinary people. Really, got up and so on and so on. But no, this pleasure of saying, or my other friends are telling me, are you crazy, Chile? This is nothing. This is just another bourgeois trick. Or Colombia now, and so on and so on. My God, don't you think that this is our destiny? even if, as Horkheimer put it, the old Frankfurt School guy, pessimist in theory, optimist in practice. Even if you know at the end we will probably at this stage fail, we have to risk it to go through it. Where there is a limit of such compromises, I advise you and some of our readers to read a book. It's not very reliable, but that part is correct. Do you know a guy called, some strange sounding name? I'm very sorry, not racist. The guy is American. Deleuze, about rearranging the world order at the end of the First World War. And when Bhaskar told you, Lenin should have read more economy and so on,
Yeah.
No, if anything, Lenin was there even too naively, brutally pragmatic in this non-Hegelian way. You know that in 1918, when Lenin concluded Brest-Litovsk Pact with Germany, it was brutal but reasonable thing to do. I mean, to save the revolution. But what was, it's now disclosed, we just ignored it from Lenin's speeches at the Politburo of Soviet Party and so on. His idea was this one: Germany will find itself alone. And by Germany, he didn't mean social democrats. He meant Hindenburg, Ludendorff, the hardline militarists. And his idea was that Russians are lost. They must find a big, more developed Western partner. And at the same time, they must get out of war. And the only option is Germany. So in the summer of 1918, they already concluded a big pact of Germany giving them weapons and stuff, Russia giving them. Lenin was obsessed of this idea. He wrote quite tragically in an analysis there that forget about reactionary Tsarist, emperor's forces, Hindenburg and so on, but that in its organization, economic, with centralized, strong military economy, the German Empire is the closest de facto you can get to some kind of socialism, that it's much more than Western liberals. So his idea was a big pact between the imperial Germany and Russia. So, Lenin, on the one hand, I like this totally crazy, non-dogmatic, pragmatic ideas. But Lenin often made terrifying mistakes here. So I don't think Lenin learned anything dogmatic from Hegel. What he learned from Hegel is precisely to cure him of this, let's say, dogmatic Marxism. Because, from Chomsky to Mensheviks, the reproach was, but there are no conditions for socialism in Russia. Nonetheless, as Marx said, it must be a highly developed country, blah, 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 blah. And this idea, no, there is a totally different logic of concrete history. It's bizarre, it's contingent, grotesque. Things can happen in a totally different way. He brought it even too far, but this is what he got from Hegel. So my answer to Bhaskar, whom I appreciate very much, is that, what we got Lenin from Hegel's logic is precisely this opportunism in a good sense. Don't just apply a general formula. Incredible things can happen. Here again, Hegel made mistakes because Ludendorff, forget about Hindenburg and the emperor, they were idiots. Ludendorff, the one who in 1923 tried a putsch with Hitler, the Munich putsch, Ludendorff had another idea. He was absolutely for this pact. You know why? To economically, in this way, first economically, then politically colonize Russia. He was the first Euro-Asian guy. He said that if Russia joins Germany, they can then obliterate, making them into sub-protectorates, all those small shitty countries for them, Poland, Czech Republic, and so on, and that such a united Euro-Asian bloc, Germany, Russia, and all in between, could resist Western imperialism, which means France, England, United States. And these two guys found themselves together, already making concrete plans for collaboration and so on and so on. The story is so crazy. So again, my answer is no. All intelligent Marxists who read Hegel, no, they didn't draw any dogmas from there. Hegel was this sobering moment of don't trust any weak linear mechanic laws of progression. You know, the typical Hegelian reversal is, which is then used by Lenin in his notion of the weakest chain, of how what may appear as the weakest point can be precisely the point where you should begin to overturn. That's pure Hegelianism. That's concrete use of Hegel there. Wow. That's why precisely those who didn't read Hegel, Mensheviks, were horrified by the October Revolution, you know. No, it was an extremely tragic event, I know. But another idea, you know, that the key point when they introduced Red Terror in 1918 was not so much attentat on Hegel, but socialist revolutionaries, which represented poor farmers, killed the German ambassador Mirbach, German ambassador to Moscow. And Lenin was furious. He apologized to Germans because they knew this. You know, the demonstrations against Bolsheviks organized by SR, social revolutionaries, in the summer was we don't to become German slaves. Lenin is right. A slave of a German military, and so on and so on. And another thing, it's confirmed. You know that Lenin, when then Entente, that is to say, British and French and a little bit of Americans occupied Murmansk. You know, the stuff there. You know what Lenin did? Bolsheviks, you wouldn't believe it. He formally asked Germans if they can, through Finland, occupy that port to relieve Bolshevik regime from imperialist pressure. So far went Lenin. And Germans, Hindenburg wanted, they're inviting us. We come to occupy Russia, but the majority in parliament didn't want to do this because they knew, Social Democrats knew that the war is lost and wanted a better peace and were afraid that this would be an incredible new adventure, whatever. But things were so crazy in those days there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, although it is interesting to think about the peace settlement to get Russia out of World War I, because it did involve these massive territorial concessions. I mean, there is a reason why the SRs and everybody saw it as such a huge betrayal. I mean, that wasn't coming from nowhere, but it was. It was also pretty, I mean, I'd be on Lenin's side of that one, right? I mean, that seems like obviously the right thing to do in that situation, because
no, but you know what was the point?
Yeah,
this is the very sad thing that I learned in this group. Now, retroactively, People claim Lenin knew that Germany will lose the war and then they will get some of this land back. It was just temporary. No, things started to get really back from Germany only when American forces start to arrive in Europe later, till May, June 1918. No. It wasn't at all clear that Germany will lose. So no, Lenin didn't count on this. He didn't count on this.
No, he was just willing. He was just willing to make the calculation.
And then let's see.
His fast track.
His reason was collaboration with Germany.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Slavoj, you've been extremely generous with your time.
I'm really grateful to you because in these times, where again to let you know my position. My God, listen, I engage a lot, and listen, in the States, we already talked about it. I follow this line of, I'm saying something wrong. Are you friendly with him? Thomas Frank.
Oh, yeah. Thomas Frank.
He put it, that's my problem with political correctness, that instead of proposing some kind of large popular unity, like you have all those small farmers, blah, 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 they're conservative. Don't focus on that. Focus on, I don't know, different tax distribution, healthcare, blah, 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 all that. There are so many topics where we could mobilize them. And what political correctness is doing, it's true. I'm becoming a Stalinist. It's a sabotage. It's precisely doing everything possible to prevent any broad popular coalition.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we should say, we are strategically against abortion.
No. You don't have to. You don't have to.
What we are.
You don't have to give an inch on the policy issues.
People on goals,
Yeah, you don't have to give an inch on the policy issues. You can say that of course, anti-discrimination for gay and trans people, of course, abortion rights, all that stuff. But you can do that. You can do that without leading into this kind of alienating culture war.
And also, don't you agree that how to put it? I think this is a false choice, either radical revolution or concrete, realist, pragmatic measures. Why either or? Why not? Let's do what we can, but at the same time, make it clear all the time that this can maybe alleviate the passage, but that the moment will come when things will change, where a much more radical intervention will be needed. We are aware of this, but again, I find it too easy to say, so let's then just sit down and wait for that big moment, no?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, I think you have to, it's also absurd to think that you're going to be able to get people to sign on to a radical revolutionary political movement if you can't show them any successes, if you can't say, like, here's what we've already achieved, and look at what we could achieve in the future. If you just sort of say, oh, well, all reforms are just, they're just nothing. They don't matter. They don't, like nothing has ever gotten better. If nothing has ever gotten better, if no reform matters, then, then why should anybody bother with any of this? I mean, if you haven't succeeded, if you haven't, I don't know, maybe the metaphor wouldn't translate, but, put points on the board, right? If you don't have, here are some past successes we've already achieved, and look, we could go even further.
That's where I read a very good liberal comment, but which says it is as if the left likes so much to retell its history of from one failure to another. Yes, there are defeats like this Supreme Court abortion, blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, look LGBT, gay rights, and so on. This was a big success, generally. I mean, a big success in the sense that the broad public accepted this. If you oppose it, you are not mainstream. You are dismissed as a crazy neocon and so on. So let's also be proud by some of our moderate successes. And of course, for the radical leftists, this is prohibited to say. Listen, it was as always a pleasure. And again, I hope it's not the last time. And now I finish with a question for you. After your, this comedians, blah, blah, great book, this is one of the books that, a bad joke, because we live in non-ironic times. I hope it will not hurt you. But as I would have put it, if we were to have me and you a nice Stalinist dictatorship with us in power, your book, Comedians and so on, would be printed in millions of examples and given to all schools, to all pupils for free, and so on. It's so important book. So is there a next one coming?
Yeah. So right now I am I'm working on a very different book. So I'm working on a book with that's co-written with Bhaskar, who we talked about, and also our friend Mike Beggs is an economics professor, called the Blueprint, which is a it's for Verso. It's an attempt to sort of think through what a realistically imaginable post-capitalist society could actually look like. Would you still have to have some markets? How would they work? Like all of that stuff. So the title is kind of a way of there's this Marxist tradition of saying don't do blueprints, for the future, because things will sort of emerge from that. It's all like the old society is already pregnant with the new one. All you have to do is help it, to get.
No, I agree with you. Precisely, this is not happening. Did I tell you? We'll talk about that. How is he called? Geertz, a German leftist. No, at many points I don't agree with him, but he said a wonderful thing. He said that the Marxist idea was always, when capitalism will disintegrate, it will already contain the seeds of a new society. And he says what's happening today is that capitalism is just disintegrating, more chaotic, but where are the seeds of the new?
No, exactly. I think that it's wishful thinking. I think you turns out, that you have to, like if you're going to be serious about the defeats of socialism in the 20th century, which and by the way, I mean, I'm not somebody who thinks that there's like nothing positive about that experience.
Oh, no. To be honest, I also, first, even in China, horrible things, Mao, many dead, but my God, China is a big, strong state, economically developed, and so on. They did some kind of a miracle there.
Yeah.
And also in other ex-communist parties, it's not as simple as that. The result is just a pure catastrophe. I
don't think it's a pure catastrophe. I think there are positive lessons as well as negative ones. All right. I know that's an awkward place to cut off. There are a couple more minutes. We will absolutely clip those and play them at a later date, so people will get to see the last little smidgen of the interview that you didn't just see. As I said before we played it, way back at the beginning of the episode, this part is my fault. I didn't clearly signal enough, like when the interview is over and we're just kind of talking, so it sort of gradually shades from one to the other, but we can carve out a couple more minutes that are very interview-like, where we're talking about the experience of so-called actually existing socialism, and we can we talk a little bit more about what Bhaskar and Mike and I are doing with the book, and we will for sure carve that out and release that as a clip later. But meanwhile, we are going to go to the post game for Give Them an Argument patrons, We have actually Russell Sbriglia, who is a frequent collaborator of Slavoj's. They have written things together. They've edited books together. And I know he wants to chat a little bit about the Hegel Marx part from the beginning part of that discussion that you just watched, and some of his own thoughts about that. So we will do that at the beginning of the post game, but also it's the fucking post game, so we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about Steven Crowder and his beef with the Daily Wire. We're going to talk about my recent run-in with Matt Walsh and how Matt seems to be eager to talk a lot of shit, but not very eager to actually could have a long-form discussion with me. There is and Steve Bannon's song about the Chinese Communist Party. So a lot of fun post-gaming stuff going on, not just Hegel, Marx, Lacan stuff, but a little Hegel, Lacan, Marx stuff too at the beginning. So about to go to the post game with Russell Sbriglia for Give Them an Argument patrons. If you're already a patron, you should see an email with the post game link. Or if you don't see the email, you go to Patreon and see it there. If you are not a patron yet, again, that is patreon.com/Ben Burgis. And for the monthly cost of a milkshake at a 50s nostalgia diner in 1994 when Pulp Fiction came out, you can get every single post game for patrons, and also the Discord server, and also a lot of other things, but mostly our eternal love and gratitude for you helping to keep this going, right? Because that's what the whole show is supported by. So if you are a patron and thus one of the best people on planet Earth, I will see you in like 2 minutes with Jake, Andy, and Russ Sbriglia. Left is best.